In 2025, an unexpected hush descended over the Nairobi courtroom. Trembling before the judge stood Aminatu Bako, a fragile old woman facing charges of land fraud that made little sense to her. Her sandals were threadbare, her fingers quivering amid the murmurs of onlookers and the clicks of recording phones. To everyone around, she appeared merely as one more impoverished soul ensnared in a scheme to claim what wasn't hers. Then came the turning point. 3 sleek black suitcases hit the floor of the court. They sprang open simultaneously, unleashing cascades of bundled cash that piled high across the tiles, an unstoppable torrent. Shocked intakes of breath echoed everywhere. The judge stood motionless. The prosecution backed away. Emerging from the spectators were 3 sharply attired men, their tones cracking as they gazed at Aminatu. "Mother," they uttered. Aminatu shut her eyes, bracing for yet another wave of shame. Little did she know, her long-buried history had at last tracked her down. Back in 1995, well before towering glass skyscrapers altered the city's horizon, and long before courtrooms would echo with Aminatu Bako's story, Nairobi saw her simply as yet another roadside food seller. She woke in the pre-dawn hours inside a cramped rented space on the fringes of the industrial district, where damp walls oozed rust and the atmosphere reeked of fuel. Her bedding was a meager mat spread over cold concrete. A splintered mirror propped against the wall captured a visage worn beyond its age, furrowed not from years but from endless anticipation. Aminatu secured her worn headscarf snugly and murmured a brief prayer, not seeking prosperity but endurance. As the sun crested, she reached the bustling bus park, a non-stop hive of activity. Motors rumbled, fare callers bellowed routes, and passengers jostled by with bundles, crates, and toddlers strapped to their sides. In the midst of this frenzy, Aminatu positioned her modest metal pot atop a glowing charcoal fire. It bubbled with beans and corn, basic fare extended by dilution and resolve. She portioned it into battered metal mugs for mere coppers that scarcely heated her skin. Unlike the hawkers around her, she refrained from yelling or pleading. She simply endured. On good days, her earnings covered a single meal and a scrap toward the rent. On leaner ones, they fell short. Yet even then, she'd linger till dusk, observing as the throng dispersed and twilight stretched over the broken asphalt. It was during those fading hours that the young men began to show up. They arrived one by one initially, lured by the aroma of hot sustenance and her calm demeanor. They avoided the pot at first, idling by the vehicles, feigning chores like sweeping or dozing, all while masking their desperation. The initial arrival was Sadiq Musa, gaunt as a reed, his footwear patched with twine. His gaze was keen, carrying the weight of premature wisdom, scanning for threats in every shift. He kept his distance, eyeing how Aminatu doled out portions and tallied her change, as though weighing if compassion came at a price. Next came Kwame Mensah, sturdier of build for his age, marked by an unexplained mark over one brow. He'd guffaw raucously at jabs from peers, a forced mirth to conceal his gnawing emptiness. The last, the most junior, was Ibrahim Lawal, reserved and meticulous, his top always fastened askew. He toted a flimsy bag, holding his few possessions, handled so often it had turned sheer. At the outset, they barely knew one another. Life on the streets drilled independence into boys like them. Bonds cost too much. Emptiness never relented. Aminatu spotted them right away, her instincts honed to perceive what most dismissed. She saw Sadiq's frame, tense at the sight of officers in uniform, Quam's habit of shielding Ibrahim from peril, and how Ibrahim's stare clung to the pot despite his steps pulling him elsewhere. On the third such twilight, with vehicles idling and the heavens shading to mottled purple, Aminatu scooped her spoon and ladled 3 servings without a word. She set the mugs along her stall's rim and paused. Sadiq edged forward warily. "Auntie," he murmured, avoiding her stare. "We have nothing." Her response was steady, without softness or urgency, pure resolve. "We can labor," he ventured. "Haul loads, clean up." "Eat," she affirmed. Ibrahim remained rooted, fearing the chance might evaporate with haste. Aminatu nudged the mug nearer. "The future holds," she told him, "but this evening, nourish yourselves." They devoured it upright, poised to bolt at any outcry. None came. After that, the trio returned consistently. They skipped formalities about identities. She did the same. Out there, labels invited risk. Over time, though, the quiet moments eased. Sadiq shared bits of her northern origins. Kwame let slip a reference to Ghana, probing if the memory could endure. Ibrahim contributed sparingly, but his rare utterances were thoughtful and exact. Aminatu absorbed far more than she shared. In the bustling market, onlookers observed and passed judgment. "Why are you giving them food?" one seller grumbled under his breath. "They'll attract thieves." "Those lads are thieves," another declared loudly, making sure Aminatu caught every word. "You're just enabling them." Aminatu continued dishing out her meals undeterred. On busier days, her pot ran dry sooner than usual. When that happened, she scraped out the last bits, splitting them into 3 lopsided shares and handing the biggest one to Ibrahim without a word. On slower days, patrons avoided her altogether. Gossip circulated that her cooking was hexed, that she was harboring outlaws. One afternoon, a passerby deliberately kicked dirt onto her fire as he went by. "Don't come crying when they torch your stand," he cautioned. That evening, storm clouds gathered overhead but held back the downpour. Sadiq hung around after his meal. "You can't keep this up," he murmured softly. "People will turn on you." Aminatu locked eyes with him. For an instant, a deep, timeless spark appeared, maybe understanding or sorrow. "They already have," she replied, her voice steady from years past. She offered no further details. She never did. What the young men didn't realize, and what nobody else in that marketplace knew, was that Aminatu had once lost a son. The void he'd left had carved out her very core, rendering even the sharpest barbs of hunger or terror mere echoes in the background. Sharing her food with these 3 couldn't mend that emptiness. Yet it occupied her hands, coaxing her heart back into rhythm. Over the following weeks, the boys started repaying her in little ways. A discarded plastic spoon picked up from the roadside, a ragged bag to block the breeze from her stove. A single coin slipped shyly next to the pot when they believed she wasn't watching. They began lingering close by, watching over her setup when the throngs turned rowdy. If rowdy drinkers hollered, Kwame would position himself in front. If police sirens pierced the air, Sadiq gave her a heads-up in time. Ibrahim figured out how to get the fire going more swiftly. For a short, delicate spell, a bond resembling kinship took root amid the urban fractures. But Nairobi, in 1995, offered no mercy for such connections. One dusk, as Aminatu was wrapping up, 2 officials from the neighborhood group strode over. Their footwear gleamed spotless. Their tones did not. "You're stirring up issues," one announced. "Folks are lodging complaints." "I peddle meals," Aminatu shot back. "You're peddling chaos," the second countered. "We're clearing out this zone." His glance darted toward the boys. Aminatu held her silence. She hoisted her pot and departed, its heat searing her hands. Trailing her, the three watched, grasping the fear but not its source. None suspected that this understated resistance, this basic kindness toward the shunned, was igniting a chain of events. A gradual one, a steadfast one, destined to circle back after 3 decades. The marketplace didn't shun Aminatu Bako overnight. It eroded like decay, gnawing at timber, subtly, relentlessly, until the frame collapsed, and all acted shocked by the abruptness. By the second month, murmurs trailed her like shadows. Mothers who used to greet her now tugged their kids nearer as they skirted her spot. Men hushed their talk, though not quite enough. Aminatu caught it all. "She hands out grub to them nightly. They crash around here. When chaos hits, recall who welcomed it." The boys picked up on the change ahead of her. Sadiq spotted it in the watchman's prolonged stares. Kwame felt it in the closing ranks around her stall at twilight. Ibrahim ate more cautiously now, pausing to scan the area after every bite, as though bracing for the earth to swallow them whole. One afternoon, a tomato vendor folded her arms and projected her voice for all to hear. "Why not bring them to your place?" she challenged Aminatu. "If you're so fond of them." Aminatu stayed focused on her pot. "This is my workplace. It's ours too." The woman retorted sharply, "And you're wrecking it for everyone." The remark struck deeper than any slur. It lodged in Aminatu's ribs, dense and all too recognizable. She'd mastered enduring hits without a wince ages ago, for that's what staying alive demanded. That night the boys kept their distance. They prowled the bus park's edges, peering from behind idling trucks as Aminatu kindled her flame. The atmosphere hung heavy with impending rain. Sellers shut down ahead of schedule, patience fraying. "Perhaps we should skip it," Ibrahim muttered, shaking his head. "If we don't show, she'll fret." Sadiq eyed a pair of men huddled by a stand, their features angular, gazes already set in judgment. "Something's off," he warned. They delayed too much. By the time they neared, the crowd had dwindled. Aminatu spotted them and offered a fleeting smile, just enough to convey, "I'm glad you're here." She reached for the serving spoon. That's when disaster struck. A foot slammed into the stand's leg from the flank, forceful and exact. The metal pot overturned, dumping beans and maize onto the soil. Vapors rose as the meal seeped away. Loose change tumbled, clinking against drains and feet. Aminatu stood rigid. The kicker didn't yell, he didn't curse. He merely surveyed the spill, then fixed his stare on her. "We told you so," he stated flatly. A chuckle erupted nearby. Another person slapped their hands once, the sound cutting and derisive. The boys rushed in together. "Don't, Aminatu!" one of them urged in a rush, his words slicing past the clamor. Kwame halted just short of the thug, knuckles balled tight. Sadiq gripped his arm and shook his head firmly. Ibrahim fixed his gaze on the scattered food, his breathing ragged and quick. Aminatu dropped to her knees. Tears didn't come. She didn't protest. Instead, she scooped up what scraps she could with her hands, stuffing beans back into the pot and wiping off dirt as best she could. Her hands trembled, not from terror, but from a deeper, fiercer shame rooted in years of endurance. "Check her out," a voice sneered, still egging the group on. The leader retreated a step, looking pleased. "Next round, we torch the whole setup," he declared before striding off. The market's din picked up again as though the incident had never occurred. Nobody offered a hand. Nobody dared glance her way. That evening, Aminatu scraped every last bit from the pot. It hardly amounted to a single serving. She split it among the three. "Go on, eat," she instructed. Kwame gulped down his reluctance. "Auntie, you first." They shared the meal wordlessly. It carried the grit of ash and soil. Ibrahim forced it past his throat regardless. Once Aminatu had everything stowed away, Sadiq broke the quiet. "This mess is on us," she met his eyes. "No, without you here I'd be scraping by in some other corner," she cut in. "But that doesn't fix it. They'll just keep targeting you." Aminatu pulled her scarf snugger. "They've already labeled me. You boys have no part in that." She turned and left them beneath the sputtering glow of a street lamp, uncertain if they should trail after her. Come sunrise, Aminatu was back. Her stand remained intact for the moment. She labored with focused haste, rushing orders to patrons while keeping a sharp watch. The young men kept their distance, observing from afar. They pitched in discreetly, shifting boxes or alerting her to looming threats. Yet they skipped meals. Starvation fueled their desperation. Kwame took on a gig, hauling bags for a guy who bartered in empty vows. Sadiq ferried packages through the terminal for folks whose stares lingered too long. Ibrahim buffed footwear by the depot until his skin split open. That night, Kwame didn't show. They spotted him by the rails, cradling a busted mouth. "Said I dragged my feet," he grumbled, then accused me of pinching stuff. The boss had pocketed his earnings and repaid him with welts. Aminatu dabbed the wound with precious drops of water. "Sit down, all of you. Just sit." She made no sales after dark. She handed over all she possessed. As the week wrapped, the enforcers showed up again. Now they carried documents, posters slapped unevenly on vendors' spots, blaring terms like sanitation, regulation, and security in heavy print. Aminatu scanned them carefully. She grasped the gist well enough. Her deadline, 7 days. The lads debated deep into the hours, tones hushed yet intense. "We gotta split," Sadiq insisted, nudging a pebble. "They're leveraging us as the excuse." "Every spot's just as rough," he added. "Sticking around means they close her out." Ibrahim clutched his sack close. "Bailing leaves her solo." Aminatu overheard without chiming in. Finally, she weighed in once. "You can't shoulder my burdens," she told them. "You've got plenty of your own." Fate decided for them 2 days on. The sweep hit at first light. Sirens wailed from cops. Footsteps pounded. Yells erupted amid the fleeing crowd. Booths toppled. Shanties ripped to shreds. Sadiq got snatched, yanked from behind a coach. He resisted and took a blow. Ibrahim bolted, his pack sliding off. Aminatu caught sight of them amid the chaos, her heart racing as she lurched from her shelter. "Sadiq!" she cried out. He spun, face panicked. "Run!" A push sent her sprawling. "Back off!" She hit the dirt. When she rose, they'd vanished. Vehicles revved up, devouring identities, features, prospects in their rumble. Aminatu hunted until exhaustion claimed her steps. She checked the hub, the hospital, the fringes where youths faded away. No one paid her any mind. As dusk fell, she slumped by her unlit burner, the vacant pot mocking her like a judgment. For the first stretch in ages, she skipped cooking, yet in her cramped space, well past the urban hush, Aminatu murmured their names into the shadows, oblivious if they'd catch them, unaware if they still breathed. She couldn't foresee this rift molding them into adults, nor that the wrong aimed at wiping her out would echo back, bold and unignorable. All she felt was kindness's toll, stripping her bare once more. In the week's post-sweep, Aminatu Bako moved like the metropolis had muted itself. The terminal thrummed on, sellers bickered. Motors belched fumes at dawn, but within her, a hush settled, one that had murmured nightly as 3 bowls sat ready by her counter. Still, she pressed on with the hunt. Dawn by dawn, she knotted her head wrap, squared her shoulders, and set out. She hit precincts where cops feigned deafness. She visited wards where medics dismissed her mid-plea. She trudged the tracks beyond derelict yards and huddled forms, voices fading into the haze. Sadiq, Ibrahim. Now and then a youth lifted his head. Occasionally a man would chuckle. Most times, however, silence greeted her calls. After 4 days on the road, blisters covered her feet. By day 7, her voice had worn down to a hoarse whisper. She rationed her water carefully, hoarding what few coins she had for rides that barely advanced her search. On the 10th day, someone halted her progress. Patrick Githingi lingered near a pristine white pickup truck, its surface free from the grime blanketing the surroundings. Dressed in a spotless shirt and overly shined shoes that seemed out of place amid the grit, he offered a tight, rehearsed smile. "You're causing a disturbance," he remarked. Aminatu didn't recognize his name at that moment, but she sensed the deference others showed him as he moved through crowds. "I'm searching for the boys," she countered. Githingi's gaze shifted briefly to the tracks. "Nairobi devours kids," he observed casually. "Can't fault it for being famished." "You must know details," Aminatu pressed. He let out a soft laugh. "I do realize when a woman needs to quit prying." She held firm. "They're starving." "Plenty of folks are," he shot back. His grin vanished. "They cautioned you. You ignored it. Now you're seeking pity." "I just want them home." Githingi inched nearer. "Head back," he murmured. "Persist in this, and you'll forfeit even more than what's already vanished," she observed as he sped off in the truck, disturbing nothing in his wake. That evening, Aminatu dreamt of a tiny hand, pulling free from her grasp. She roused before sunrise, her pulse pounding, the flavor of grit lingering on her tongue. The hunt continued, yet Nairobi had rendered its verdict. Shutters slammed, replies turned elusive, folks dodged her stare. After 3 weeks, the reality seeped into Aminatu's very core. The lads had vanished. She rejected the notion of death outright, simply vanished, dispersed into the vast, uncaring tomorrow that engulfs the destitute. Her market stand resumed operations, though diminished in scope. Patrons dwindled. Certain days brought 0 visitors. Still, she prepared meals regardless, not anticipating the boys' comeback, but because halting would mean voicing an acceptance she couldn't yet face. In the darkness of her leased quarters each night, Aminatu conversed with bygone times. She recalled a different child from long ago, prior to Nairobi, the terminal, and the bazaar. There was once an infant son, arriving amid a deluge that eroded paths and eroded vows alike. She had cherished him with intense, subdued devotion, fearing the world might spot him and claim him as well. And eventually, it did. through sickness, separation, bewilderment, explanations that never quite filled the void he carved. No burial site, no goodbye, merely emptiness. That's the reason she had nourished the boys. Not as a substitute for her sorrow. Impossible, but since spotting deprivation once made it impossible to overlook again. As seasons turned, the metropolis pressed forward. Aminatu lingered behind. Those periods aged her swiftly. Jobs grew scarcer, her fingers grew rigid, her posture bent. She laundered garments for households that addressed her like an object. She scrubbed workplaces after hours, deciphering affluence from its discards. Yet each dusk, she whipped up a bit more sustenance. On some occasions, she hauled it to the bus terminal and waited in solitude until it grew cold. On others, she set it by the window ledge to sit uneaten till daylight when she doled it out to wandering mutts. Meanwhile, existence toughened the youths elsewhere. Sadiq Musa ended up aboard a lorry bound northward alongside taciturn men who observed keenly. He toiled at docks and warehouses, swiftly grasping which guidelines held weight and which aimed to crush him. He dozed fitfully. He stashed money with fervor. Want instilled rigor in him. Recollection instilled caution. Kwame Mensah traversed frontiers beyond his comprehension, chasing labor as it surfaced. Building zones, freight areas, evening classes. He mastered poring over agreements with patience and precision. He discovered that humor could ease doubts and quietude could preserve him. Ibrahim Lawal got a short-term haven from a deceiver who valued his subdued demeanor as an asset. He picked up arithmetic. He delved into origins. He saw how readily compliance gets confused with frailty. When the betrayer vanished one evening, Ibrahim pressed onward, clutching those insights like charms. Not one erased Aminatu from memory. Her features might fade at times. The precise timbre of her words might soften, but the essence endured vividly. Eat. The next day holds promise. In Nairobi, a year elapsed, then another. Aminatu's locks turned gray prematurely. Her reputation slipped from chatter. The panel identified fresh victims. Patrick Githini ascended soundlessly and methodically, occupying voids left by the afflicted. Aminatu remained unaware. She focused solely on her routines, her labors, her supplications. One twilight while securing her booth, a youthful lad lingered close. He resembled Ibrahim in his earlier days, wary, famished, hesitant. Aminatu's heart clenched. She paused. For the first instance in existence, dread surpassed her impulses. She gathered her things hastily and departed, abandoning the child by himself. That night, rest evaded her. Come dawn, regret scorched fiercer than any peril. She ventured back to the transit hub to seek him. He had disappeared. The ache rooted profoundly. Aminatu realized in that moment that the demands of survival hadn't turned her heart cold, but rather made her wary of even the faintest glimmer of optimism. Time lost its sharp edges as the years merged into one another. Industries shut down, skyscrapers sprang up, streets expanded, and folks grew older. Through it all, Aminatu persevered. She grew accustomed to questions that lingered without answers. She grew quieter in her words. She came to bear her sorrow like an extra backbone, propping her up amid the ruins when everything else crumbled. Yet one lesson eluded her entirely. One she never grasped. How to abandon the conviction that compassion held value, even in the face of its defeats. Deep down, buried under decades of burden, regret, and wariness, an unspoiled reality endured. She had nourished those young men when the rest of the world turned away. And despite the harsh repercussions from society, that gesture hadn't evaporated. It had simply journeyed onward, subdued and unhurried, biding its time until a force robust enough emerged to bring it home. Aminatu had no inkling that someday, individuals marked indelibly by her deeds would find their way back to her. She only sensed each evening as she stirred her simmering stew and sampled it as though hunger still prowled nearby, that some part of her waited. By the point when Aminatu Bako resigned herself to the boy's permanent absence, Nairobi had already reshaped her role within its sprawl. The bus park no longer seemed like her territory. Fresh sellers had claimed the spots she once claimed as her own. Younger sellers, with bolder shouts and more vibrant cookware, hawked their wares quicker, at lower prices, with greater intensity. Aminatu adjusted as she invariably did, by diminishing her presence. She shifted nearer to the roadside verge, where grime blanketed every surface and patrons were scarcer. She figured out the safest times of day, the spots least prone to drawing eyes. She mastered the art of folding up her setup at the slightest hint of unrest, but tranquility proved fleeting, even in that corner. One afternoon, while Aminatu scrubbed her cooking pot with water she'd lugged from her home, a silhouette darkened her stand. She glanced upward and spotted Patrick Githinji once more. This encounter brought no grin to his face. "You're still around," he remarked, sounding astonished by a blemish that refused to fade. "This is my workplace," Aminatu shot back. He surveyed the surroundings. "The neighborhood's evolving. Seasons shift too," she murmured softly. Githinji's jaw clenched. "You draw trouble." Aminatu locked gazes with him. Trouble hunts the destitute, invited or not. For an instant, an enigmatic expression flickered over his features. Then it dissolved. "Watch yourself," he warned. "Folks like you go missing daily." He departed, letting the menace linger in the air like lingering haze. That evening, Aminatu skipped cooking altogether. She perched on her bedding in the shadows, attuned to the city's rhythmic pulse. The dread felt recognizable, yet now it carried extra weight, more calculated intent. Over the ensuing weeks, disruptions mounted near her spot. Authorities cited her stall for blocking pathways. An unfamiliar fellow insisted on a payment beyond her means. When she objected, he chuckled and jotted her name deliberately, as if relishing the act. Not long afterward, patrons vanished completely. Word had spread that her meals posed risks. Rumors circulated of an ongoing probe into her affairs. Whispers circulated that steered people to avoid her gaze by darting across the road. Aminatu then comprehended what she'd long intuited. Destitution wasn't merely a state of being. It functioned as a sentence. She sought alternative livelihoods. She laundered garments in gated yards where security eyed her movements over her expression. She mopped office floors after hours, vigilant against handling items that might later be deemed stolen. She cleared debris from building sites under cover of night, compensated with crumpled bills reeking of earth and postponement. Her frame rebelled, joints ballooned, digits seized up. Nonetheless, she kept preparing meals. Occasionally, she pondered the reason. No visitors appeared, no inquiries arrived. The vessel remained burdensome and brimming, chiding her for an optimism she couldn't defend. One night, as downpour hammered her shelter's corrugated ceiling, Aminatu shattered. She leaned her brow against the partition and wept, not with clamor or theatrics, but in subdued heaves that drained her utterly. She mourned the young men, the offspring she'd forfeited, the stretches of time that extracted far more than they yielded. Once done, she cleansed her cheeks, rose, and kindled the burner. Dawn endures, she confided to the empty space. In distant places, the young men absorbed harsher teachings. Sadiq Musa came to see how wealth could shield or betray. At the docks, he observed lives unravel from misplaced faith in unreliable allies. He honed the skill of gauging characters like deciphering charts. He cultivated restraint. He mastered the art of enduring. Kwame Mensah grasped how vigor invited manipulation. Amid building projects, he witnessed workers maimed and forsaken, their efforts etched solely in foundations. He took to recording details, posing inquiries, refusing signatures on unclear terms. Ibrahim Lawal found potency in restraint. He favored hearing over voicing. He detected overlooked rhythms, origins, identities, minor inconsistencies, revealing grander tales. Time wore on. They remained ignorant of Aminatu's whereabouts. They hunted for traces sporadically, amid the grind of staying afloat and weariness. They posed queries that led to dead ends. They chased down leads that faded into nothing. Yet her memory stayed vivid for them. The selflessness she embodied, never demanding a thing in return. How she'd nourished them despite the toll on her own life. How she'd shielded them from hardship without a word about her sacrifices. Meanwhile, in Nairobi, Aminatu's body started betraying her. It began with spells of vertigo, followed by a persistent cough she tried to dismiss. She pushed through until denial was no longer an option. At the health center, a nurse reviewed her records and let out a weary breath. "You're overdoing it," the woman remarked. Aminatu offered a weak smile. "I do what's necessary." The nurse just shook her head in disbelief. "Necessary will wear you down." Aminatu stayed silent. She'd come to terms ages ago that weariness didn't equate to defeat. As her vitality diminished, troubles mounted. One morning, an official notice was affixed to her door. Heavily stamped and couched in bureaucratic jargon she couldn't decipher. It mentioned unauthorized tenancy and an impending evaluation. It required steps she didn't comprehend, by a date she couldn't reach. She carried it to a nearby government building. The clerk gave it a cursory look. "Get a lawyer and try again," he advised. "I can't help without that." On the building's steps outside, Aminatu reread the document, her finger following the unfamiliar phrases. The familiar dread welled up, echoing the powerlessness she'd known while scouring stations for boys whose identities had never been documented. In that moment, she sensed a change. This wasn't mere arbitrary harshness anymore. It felt deliberate. Patrick Gethingi's name emerged once more, murmured by a stranger who'd slipped her a few coins for the quiet alert. "He's driving the urban renewal push," the man confided. "They're pushing folks aside. You don't fit their plans." Aminatu expressed her gratitude and made her way back home at a measured pace. That evening, she prepared an extra-large meal. She savored it solo on purpose, as though etching the moment into memory. Afterward, she gathered her few possessions into a modest sack and stashed her treasures: her scarf, her cooking pot, a cherished scrap of fabric from her late child. The following day, authorities arrived. Their tone was courteous, their expressions friendly. They invoked terms like procedure and compliance. They explained she'd breached guidelines she'd been unaware of. Her objections prompted notes in their pads. Her tears drew averted gazes. By dusk, her vendor spot had vanished. Aminatu lingered on the empty patch of earth where it once stood, a peculiar serenity washing over her. She'd been stripped of stands in the past. She'd mourned loved ones. She'd surrendered fragments of her spirit. What chilled her this time wasn't mere deprivation, but obliteration. As she settled onto her bedding that night, Aminatu grasped how her open-hearted generosity was now her undoing. That, sustaining those starving youths, had branded her as out of line. But she also recognized a deeper truth. She'd weathered graver storms. She shut her eyes and regulated her breathing against the anxiety, even and deliberate. Out there, past the urban sprawl, past decades and distances, the young men she'd sustained persisted. She couldn't say how or precisely where. But she held on to the conviction, soft yet unyielding, that facts didn't dissolve from neglect. They simply endured. The stretch from 2000 to 2015 crept up on Aminatu Bako without fanfare. Days blended into years, each one etching faint lines on her frame, and heavier ones on those she tended. She relocated frequently. When costs climbed, she relocated. When property owners reneged, she relocated. When acquaintances posed queries that rang like veiled threats, she relocated once more. Her essentials squeezed into a pair of bags. Threadbare garments, her tin pot bundled in fabric, and a sun-bleached scarf she laundered meticulously by hand. Employment followed opportunity's trail. Certain dawns found her laundering linens in gated yards that locked with an ominous click she chose to disregard. Overhead, voices chattered about education and futures, presuming her invisibility. She'd labor until her hands blistered, then continue for the meager change, double-checking the payout to confirm its reality. On alternate shifts, she'd mop corporate spaces under cover of night. She memorized the patrols of watchmen, the hum of lifts, how affluence scattered scraps in trash but polished surfaces spotless. She navigated with caution, knowing a single claim could wipe her existence clean in hours. Evenings brought her to her cramped space, where she'd prepare meals, not daily, but regularly to sustain the ritual. Occasionally, she'd overcook and dine unhurriedly by herself, the heat grounding her. More often, she'd portion leftovers into a vessel and deliver them to the city's fringes for anonymous discovery. She never lingered to witness the takers. Ignorance proved kinder. Her form altered, her spine bent, her joints ached. The cough resurfaced with each winter and clung tenaciously. Illness forced a single day's pause before she'd resume duties. Idleness demanded a price beyond her means. Nonetheless, Aminatu persisted. Unbeknownst to her, that resilience was molding three distant existences. Sadiq Musa came to appreciate timing's worth. Amid the docks, he observed workers haste into collapse. He saw counterparts bide their moments and endure. Sadiq Musa came to understand the power of silence, speaking only when it served a purpose while keeping his ears attuned to every whisper. He hoarded every penny with fierce determination, wiring modest sums to safe havens he relied on far more than any bank. If deception struck, he jotted down the method. If danger loomed, he recorded the source. Aminatu's words echoed in his mind, not for solace, but as a guiding command. Eat. Tomorrow holds promise, yet, for Sadiq, the future transformed into a territory worth mapping out, shielding, and fighting to secure. Kwame Mensah grasped the true price of endurance amid the grueling labor of building sites that spanned nations. He heaved loads until his back and arms burned in protest. He saw workers crumple under the strain, only to be swiftly supplanted before the air cleared of grit. He realized that raw power counted for little absent the protection of written agreements and endorsed receipts. Under the cover of darkness, he joined evening lessons with deliberate caution. The pages of books lost their terror, and figures on ledgers started to align. He found that mastering the rules of the game provided its own unbreakable shield. When a supervisor mocked him, Kwame met it with a grin and scribbled details in the quiet hours that followed. Ibrahim Lawal mastered the art of navigation. He journeyed alongside merchants, scrutinizing border patrols and committing border posts to memory. He discerned which paths offered security and which demanded utmost discretion. He traced the flow of merchandise and the currency that trailed in its wake. Words rarely escaped his lips. Strangers dismissed him as unremarkable, and he welcomed the oversight. Deep in their frames, all three bore the ache of deprivation, yet their hearts swelled with unspoken thanks. They wondered about Aminatu's fate, uncertain if she still breathed. At times, dread whispered that she did not. At others, they persuaded themselves she had forged ahead, leaving their shared past behind. But her imprint lingered indelibly in their souls. Decades on, fate wove their trajectories together, not through intent but sheer coincidence, in the bustle of a bus depot. It wasn't the exact spot etched in their memories, yet its rhythm stirred echoes of the old. Kwame spotted Sadiq's familiar stance before the features sharpened into recognition. Ibrahim caught a snippet of dialogue laced with a northern lilt and pivoted sharply. Their gazes locked in a suspended hush of incredulity. Conversation unfolded over hours, belief dawning even more gradually as they pieced together the impossible reunion. They exchanged shards of their ordeals, the assault, the frantic escape, the gnawing emptiness. They traded her sayings like badges of old wounds. "She nourished us from her own scarcity," Kwame murmured. "She faced down the danger for us," Sadiq added. Ibrahim held his peace, though a faint tremor betrayed his grip. From that pivotal encounter, their quest became a joint endeavor. They posed inquiries across distant towns and lands, chasing leads that dissolved into shadows. They cultivated resilience against letdowns. They erected existences that, while far from opulent or effortless, offered a firm foundation. In Nairobi, Aminatu faded into the backdrop of time's passage. Come 2015, she had carved out a niche beside an expanding transit center, peddling basic meals once more. The metropolis had evolved dramatically. Skyscrapers pierced the sky on former vacant lots. Gadgets buzzed with life, and the rhythm accelerated. True to form, she adjusted without fanfare. She hawked her wares in subdued tones, shared few words, and steered clear of the spotlight. Her patrons included haulers, loaders, and sweepers, folks who tallied their earnings much as she did. She memorized their routines and tastes. She absorbed their stories far more than she offered her own. Caution defined her now. When youngsters lingered close, she observed them warily, but refrained from drawing them near. When desperation gazed out from youthful faces, she bit back her impulse and tended to those with cash in hand. It stemmed not from hardness, but trepidation. That generosity might again twist into a tool for her ruin. Even so, she prepared surplus portions. In stolen pauses, she pictured the young ones matured, sheltered, and sated, no longer fleeing shadows. She envisioned their memories of her dissolving. She assured herself that such erasure amounted to a gentle release. Her vitality waned steadily in the background. Fatigue overtook her sooner. Minor details escaped her grasp. Identities faded, timelines muddled. One midday, she blacked out. She roused in a medical room, an attendant clasping her palm. "You need to ease up," the woman urged. Aminatu managed a faint curve of her lips. "Life refuses to pause." The attendant's brow furrowed. "But it can halt altogether." Aminatu averted her eyes to the barrier, mortified by the tears that welled without warning. As the seasons advanced, strains resurfaced in her world. Surveyors showed up with notepads and affable grins touting advancement and prospects. They documented details and snapped images. They pledged reimbursements that evaporated like mist. Aminatu absorbed their pitch without grasping every nuance, but enough unease settled in her gut. She encountered Patrick Gathini's name anew amid paperwork and placards, uttered with deference by strangers ignorant of their tangled history. He had ascended to influence, his edges smoothed by success. She averted her gaze and pressed forward humbly. By 2020, whispers of overhaul solidified into inevitability. Placards went up. Assemblies were scheduled. Terms like displacement and adherence buzzed in the air. Aminatu joined a single gathering and slipped away prematurely. The dialogue raced beyond her, queries hanging unresolved. She retreated to her stand and resumed her preparations. In still interludes, she pondered if closure would arrive, not through flames or force, but bureaucracy and ink. She grasped little of it. She wrapped her headcloth more snugly and persisted, as endurance had always dictated. Unbeknownst to her, over vast distances and time, the trio edged nearer to revelation. They had uncovered threads connecting ancient incursions to fresh expansions. She remained unaware that the three men were tracing funds flowing through channels Ibrahim knew from shady deals, patterns Kwame could decipher, and schedules Sadiq had charted out. Aminatu had no idea that her steadfastness, once dismissed as frailty, was on the verge of revealing its real strength. All she sensed was that the next day still held some promise. Come 2025, the bustling transport center close to where Aminatu Bako peddled her wares bore little resemblance to the dusty spot she'd claimed decades ago. Vast expanses of bare earth had given way to towering glass structures and sleek metal frameworks piercing the horizon. Giant ads touted dreams she couldn't even dream of affording. Buses now pulled in neat formations, watched over by guards in crisp, identical outfits. Advancement had swept in, structured, streamlined, and unforgiving, leaving Aminatu's modest stand tucked on the periphery, overlooked like an oversight instead of a deliberate kindness. She hawked her goods at dawn, ahead of the regulators' rounds and the clamor that would soon overwhelm everything. Her patrons stayed the familiar sort. Night shift janitors wrapping up, cabbies gearing up for their opening runs, loaders scraping together change for a meal. She recognized their features instantly. She could spot the signs of a sleepless night. She understood when funds were tight and they'd circle back soon. Questions weren't her style. As the sun crested that particular dawn, a fellow in his 20s neared her setup, decked out in a high-vis jacket and clutching a pristine notepad. "Ma'am," he greeted with courtesy, "does this stand belong to you?" Aminatu gave a simple nod. "It does." His grin widened. "We're revising the logs here. The zone's getting a full makeover." She kept stirring her brew at a measured pace. "We've heard talk like that plenty of times." "This round it's for real," he countered, flipping through his notes. You'll have to put your signature on a few forms." Wiping her palms on her apron, she bent forward, peering hard at the sheet. The text crammed in tight, all stiff and official, slipping right by without sticking. "So, what's it all mean?" she queried. The guy paused for a beat. "Just the usual, short-term move with payout down the line." When Aminatu pressed further, he shuffled his feet. "Details on that will come later." She passed the document over. "I want a proper breakdown." His expression cooled. "Ma'am, the rest have all agreed already." A well-known pressure built in her ribs. "I'm not the rest." With a resigned exhale, he jotted something down and departed. Later that day, a pair of higher-ups showed up, seasoned, assured. One took the lead in talking, the other observed closely. "You're on government property," the talker declared. "I've been here for ages," Aminatu shot back. "Without any permit. Nobody told me to clear out before." "We're telling you now." Her gaze drifted to the simmering pot, the scarred surface of her bench, the patch of dirt her soles had claimed over time. She knew every inch by feel. "And just where do I head?" The guy lifted his shoulders. "Finding a spot isn't on us." They dropped off yet another form, weightier than the prior one. That evening, Aminatu skipped the cooking. Perched on her seat, she fixed on the document until the letters swam into vague forms. Her fingertip followed the strokes, a wave of foolishness and vulnerability washing over her. Memories surfaced of those young lads, the powerlessness gripping her amid old police outposts. Forms shoved her way, seeking replies she couldn't supply. Dread crept back, not cutting, but steady and unyielding. In the following days, the squeeze tightened. Checkers dropped by unannounced. They paced off distances. They snapped shots. They droned on about cutoffs Aminatu swore she hadn't endorsed. Her inquiries met with grins that stayed skin-deep. One midday, while Aminatu handed off an order, a lady close by lifted her device. "Hey, isn't she the one?" the lady called out clear as day. Aminatu glanced over. "You know, the figure buzzing all over the web." Whispers rippled out. A bystander flashed a display to another. Aminatu snatched a peek at her own image, aged, weary, encased amid script beyond her grasp. As dusk fell, a local sidled up, soft-spoken. "Folks are chatting," the lady murmured, "claiming you rake in cash by faking hardship, that you're tied to some fraud." Aminatu let out a faint chuckle. "Who'd swallow that?" The lady stayed silent. By week's close, her trade thinned out. Plenty steered clear altogether. A few probed with tones edging on blame. "You licensed. This legit. Word is you're under probe." Aminatu responded with steady calm, though every phrase scraped like grit in her windpipe. Then the notice landed, creased, sealed, embossed. The stock felt sturdy, bureaucratic. The phrasing icier than prior reads. She faced a call to appear. Not for shifting spots or clearing confusion, but scrutiny. Her grip trembled on the envelope. She scanned it over and over, hunting for an error that wasn't there. That darkness, Aminatu bundled a light pack and headed to a far-off contact who'd shown her grace once. She skimmed the details, just pleaded for a night's rest. In the shadows, she tossed sleepless to strange noises, pulse racing wild. "What wrong have I committed?" she pondered. Her mind reran the years, probing for faults. She'd merely vended meals. Aminatu had nourished kids along the way. She had relocated whenever eviction loomed. She had endured in silence, if that counted as an offense. She couldn't pinpoint the exact moment it happened. The court date loomed nearer by the day. That morning, she prepared meticulously, scrubbing her headscarf until it gleamed. She slipped into her freshest outfit. Though her back throbbed, she held herself upright. A crowd milled about the courthouse entrance. Cameras were out, capturing everything. A voice murmured in recognition as she neared. The atmosphere inside buzzed with condemnation. The clerk mangled her name in his announcement. She gently set him straight. No sorry came from him. They directed her to a rigid seat and ordered her to stay put. While sitting there, Aminatu spotted 3 figures lingering toward the rear. They seemed out of sync with the surroundings. Dressed sharply and calm, they contrasted sharply with the widespread anxiety and disarray. One fixed his gaze on her, creases deepening on his forehead. A second bent toward his companion, murmuring with a clenched jaw. Aminatu averted her eyes, flushed by the scrutiny. These strangers meant nothing to her. There was no cause for familiarity. At last, her turn arrived, and she rose on shaky legs. The inquiries hit like rapid fire. Charges piled on swiftly. They thrust forward forms she'd never laid eyes on. Papers stamped with her name and scrawls that weren't hers. She denied it with a firm shake of her head. "You're claiming you didn't," a voice snapped from the bench. "Not everything's clear to me," she answered. "I needed assistance." A wave of mocking chuckles swept the chamber, subdued yet biting. "How handy." A skeptic grumbled under his breath. The ground seemed to sway under Aminatu's feet. She gripped the edge of the desk for balance. From the shadows at the back, one man balled his hands into knots. The next glanced at his screen, his expression sharpening. The remaining one regarded her like an apparition from the past. Silence held them all, for now. They grasped a truth that eluded her. This wasn't the time for rescue. Better to watch the snare snap shut. They sent her away with orders to come back. The daylight outside pierced harshly. Murmurs trailed in her wake. Devices filmed her wordless retreat. Her pace dragged, burdened by bewilderment and dread. By dusk, rumors were racing. A destitute lady accused of deceit, of falsehoods, Aminatu. That evening, she huddled by herself, her cooking vessel idle, her palms idle too, unaware that this shame marked just the start, that her identity shielded a vast, shadowy operation, that her unassuming existence had tangled with an apparatus designed to seize without a glance. All she sensed was her familiar perch on the brink of some vast, merciless force, utterly alone. Or so it appeared. When Aminatu Bako grasped that the probe had escaped confidentiality and gone viral, it was too late. Her name bubbled up in hushed talks, then online labels, then bold print. Illiterate though she was, the sting reached her all the same. Devices tracked her every move. Former acquaintances, once nodding warmly, now peered through shades. Onlookers jabbed fingers. "That's her," one declared near a stand as she shuffled by. "The phony beggar. Word is, she pocketed cash from NGOs," his friend shot back. Aminatu curtailed her outings after noon. She hustled through her shifts at dawn, wrapped things up fast and sought shelter in whatever temporary spot allowed it. She grew attuned to the click of a lens engaging. She mastered the art of lowered glances. The next notice arrived, more insistent and icy. Officers showed up at first light, courteous yet detached. They let her secure the place, but queries, off limits. A modest throng assembled on the road, intrigue twisting toward delight. "Got her at last," a fellow declared. Aminatu's breath caught. Visions of the lads, hauled off long before by authorities, flooded back. The helplessness of witnessing badges seal their doom. It seared anew. Inside the precinct, the barrage fell hard. "Did you gather donations? Who put you up to it? What became of the funds?" "I peddle meals," Aminatu insisted. "No funds pass through me." They flashed images, her booth, her features, folks digging into her wares. Then came the fakes, signatures echoing hers but off-kilter, alien. "This is yours," a cop pushed. "Never," she countered, her tone even as her fingers quivered. "That's not my hand." "Admitting you can't read, then," he probed. She paused, the label snared like bait. "I admit seeking aid," she clarified, "and getting none." Glances darted among them. Beyond the walls, the tail sharpened into fangs. Footage emerged. Aminatu, taking payment from a buyer, edited slow, tagged to paint transaction as trickery. A snippet captured her rejecting a paper, spun as proof of evasion. Online barbs cut deep. She duped the lot. Perpetual sob story. Cage her. Phoneless herself. Aminatu heard of the venom via a neighbor who displayed it, then regretted the reveal. "Figured you'd want the heads up," the lady murmured. Aminatu dipped her chin. She never requested another look. The trial loomed on the calendar. On the day of the hearing, Aminatu donned the identical scarf from her initial court appearance. She laundered it meticulously, pressing the material flat with palms worn by decades of labor. She murmured a quiet prayer, seeking not victory, but understanding. The courthouse buzzed with activity. Journalists hovered by the doors, their cameras ready. Onlookers buzzed in low voices. Spectators jostled ahead, keen to observe an event they felt they already grasped. Within, tension hung thick in the atmosphere. Aminatu settled into her chair, fingers clasped neatly. Her name echoed once more, this time articulated accurately, yet devoid of any kindness. The charges unfolded methodically, without excess. Fraud, impersonation, unlawful land seizure, diversion of donation funds, terms piled high until they seemed fabricated. An attorney rose to argue her prosecution. Nkiru Okorie advanced assuredly. Her attire fit sharply, her tone even-keeled. She avoided glancing at Aminatu during her address. "This matter," Nkiru declared, "revolves around trickery, leveraging pity and concealing greed under the guise of need." Aminatu gulped. Nkiru pressed on. The accused fabricated tales of struggle to draw in contributions, all while unlawfully holding property and ignoring legal orders. Aminatu lifted her hand a fraction. "I didn't," she began. "Hold on," the judge interjected gently. "Your moment will come." Evidence followed. Papers, images, statements from authorities who delivered them with poise and certainty. They recounted alerts issued, chances extended, and rejections issued. Aminatu absorbed it all, frozen in disbelief. This bore no resemblance to her reality. At last, her opportunity arrived, and she rose deliberately. "I peddle meals," she stated. "Food has been my trade forever." Nkiru offered a subtle smirk. "Yet you took funds exceeding mere compensation." "Folks compensated for meals," Aminatu countered. "Occasionally with surplus. For good causes, for those starving," she added plainly. A whisper spread across the chamber. Nkiru approached nearer. "Ms. Bako, are you asking this tribunal to accept that across years you've never profited from compassion?" Aminatu held her stare. "Compassion kept me hungry," she replied. "Effort sustained me. The judge inclined nearer. "And these endorsements?" Aminatu examined the documents anew. "They're forgeries. Can you demonstrate otherwise?" A hush extended. Aminatu dropped her gaze. "I can't," she conceded. That confession bore down heavily. Beyond the doors, the trio eavesdropped. Sadiq Musa crossed his arms, his expression rigid. Kwame Mensah fixed his eyes downward, tracking his inhales. Ibrahim Lawal observed Nkiru intently, spotting her omissions, her haste over key points. They had tracked the trial discreetly, methodically. They had unraveled the documents via shell departments and panels. They had charted links, pointing squarely to Patrick Githingi. But the moment was crucial. Intervening prematurely would solidify the story. The true culprits would pull back. Proof would dissolve. Thus, they held off. Within, Aminatu's tone faltered at last. "These documents baffle me," she confessed. "I sought assistance. No explanations came." Nkiru cocked her head. "Lack of knowledge doesn't equate to blamelessness." The words struck forcefully. Aminatu sensed a fracture, quietly, incompletely, yet painfully. She recalled the youths. She recalled evenings preparing dishes from scraps. She pondered how virtue could so swiftly morph into culpability. The session paused, ruling deferred. Reporters swarmed without. "Ms. Bako, what's your reply to the claims? Do you confess fault? Who's backing your defense?" Aminatu remained silent. She progressed unhurriedly, chin lowered amid the clamor. That evening, in a loned space, she sat solitary and studied her palms. Those were the very hands that had prepared, tidied, hauled, nourished. Now they stood, accused of fraud. For a fleeting instant, she questioned if benevolence had been folly. Elsewhere in the metropolis, Sadiq breathed out harshly. "They're breaking her down." Kwame inclined his head. "They're overly assured." Ibrahim placed his device aside. "They assume the full view stays hidden." Sadiq eyed the illuminated courthouse against the darkness. "We won't allow her to shoulder their sins at the close." "Patience," Kwame urged. "Not now." Ibrahim's look remained composed. Very soon. In her quarters, Aminatu reclined still dressed, fatigue weighing on her frame. She shut her lids and strained to evoke eras when tomorrow lacked obstruction. Unaware that those she had once supported were forging a confrontation potent enough to dismantle falsehoods amassed over years. All she grasped was the morrow's ambiguity, and after ages, genuine dread that it might claim her life. The follow-up proceeding was slated for Thursday dawn, though verdict had long formed amid widespread sentiment. Upon Aminatu Bako's guided entry, via a rear portal to skirt the throng, her identity had shrunk to a symbol of vileness, not an individual. A parable of peril, a lesson against overextending faith in the needy. In the courtroom, the seats filled up even more than earlier. Spectators murmured softly, reporters rustled their notes. Devices stayed tucked away, concealed under purses and pads, yet capturing everything discreetly. Aminatu settled into her chair, palms clasped together, stare locked on the surface ahead. She seemed diminished in a way she'd never experienced. Not due to the charges against her, but from grasping how irrelevant facts became once a narrative took hold. On the opposite side, Patrick Githingi lounged at ease beside his team of consultants and authorities. Dressed in a somber suit, he projected a subtle air of regret, treating the ordeal as a mere hassle rather than a scheme he'd orchestrated. Spotting Aminatu, his eyes glided over her indifferently. She knew him on sight. The echo of his threat from years back hit her sharply. "People like you vanish daily," The judge made her entrance. Everyone stood briefly before resuming their places. Nkiru Okoria rose to proceed with the proceedings. Her manner remained courteous, her stance impeccable. No need for volume in her delivery. The proof laid out thus far, she explained, revealed a steady trail of deception. The accused had cast herself as helpless to evoke pity, all while defying official steps meant to benefit the area. Aminatu's grip tightened. Nkiru motioned to a display where visuals materialized. Charts, urban renewal blueprints, snaps of raised terrain, now dotted with heavy machinery. This initiative in Nkiru has delivered employment and facilities, she noted, though some folks tried to block it through non-compliance. She pivoted subtly, enough to point toward Aminatu without uttering her name. Next came a subordinate bureaucrat, testifying with caution on sessions Aminatu had joined and paperwork she'd been handed. He addressed the room as though she weren't there, treating her more like a concept than flesh and blood. When prompted for her side, Aminatu rose deliberately. "I never declined," she stated. "I simply posed inquiries." "Were those inquiries addressed?" the judge inquired. "No," Aminatu answered. "Just additional forms." A muffled wave of chuckles swept the space, and Nkiru advanced. "Ms. Bako, are you claiming the process let you down?" Aminatu pondered it. "I'm stating that I couldn't make sense of it." Nkiru nodded with apparent empathy. "Plenty of folks struggle with it. That's precisely why we depend on protocols." "Protocols are meant to safeguard individuals," Aminatu murmured, "not ensnare them." The judge lifted a palm. "Let's stay on track." Aminatu saw then that focus was a privilege for those whose existence wasn't being dissected. Patrick Githingi took the stand next. He rose fluidly, straightening his links, giving a deferential incline to the bench. His tone stayed even, deliberate, rehearsed. "Our goal was always advancement for the neighborhood," he declared. "We adhered to all rules. Regrettably, certain people misinterpret progress and push back against it." "Did you engage directly with the accused?" Nkiru pressed. Patrick hesitated, feigning recollection. "Perhaps I encountered her on a couple of occasions. She was quite insistent." Heat flushed Aminatu's torso. "Did you intimidate her?" Nkiru followed up. Patrick offered a slight grin. "Absolutely not." When given the floor, Aminatu's words quivered in spite of her resolve. "You warned me to quit inquiring," she accused. "You claimed folks like me get erased." Silence gripped the air. Patrick appeared truly taken aback. "I have no memory of such an exchange." Nkiru faced Aminatu. "Ms. Bako, are you alleging coercion?" "I'm recounting what I heard," Aminatu countered. "Any corroborators?" Nkiru probed. Aminatu parted her lips, then shut them. "None," she admitted. Patrick's expression softened into a gentle smile. "I hold no grudge against her," he added. "Yet claims lacking evidence pose risks." The words lingered. "Claims lacking evidence." Aminatu lowered herself back into her seat gradually, vitality ebbing away. From the rear rows, Sadiq Musa observed Patrick intently. He registered the poise, the assurance, the deliberate avoidance of eye contact with Aminatu. Kwame Mensah jotted furiously, his face tense. Ibrahim Lawal followed the parade of cited files, verifying them in his head. They'd anticipated as much. What disturbed them was its potency. The session broke once more, with a ruling set for shortly. Beyond the doors, media thronged. Patrick Githingi issued a concise remark on openness and forward momentum. Nkiru Okoria passed on remarks but offered a courteous grin. Aminatu was hurried beyond the mics. Her quietude read as admission of fault. That night, she went back to quarters that felt alien, a brief haven. Perched on the mattress, she gazed at the plaster. Age weighed on her not physically, but soul-deep. Exhausted from justifying her actions, from constant misinterpretation, from enduring in silence just to face noisy reprisals. Her mind drifted to the lads once more, recalling the ferocity with which she'd shielded them in their youth. She pondered if protection with equal fervor would ever come her way. Meanwhile, across Nairobi, the three men convened in a modest flat. "That's exactly how they pull it off," Kwame said, "by painting her as irrational." "And isolated," Sadiq chimed in. Ibrahim gave a slight nod. "They're pushing the storyline too fast, which suggests they're concealing details." The trio spread out papers on the table, maps, corporate files, notes from meetings, and connections started to surface. Timelines synced up, names cropped up again and again. Patrick Githingi linked to shadowy firms that profited from evictions by force. The marks on Aminatu's papers echoed others, duplicated across records. "We require an insider," someone noted. "Actually, we already do," Ibrahim responded softly. He displayed a text from a low-level staffer who'd faltered repeatedly on the stand. A woman who'd probed too much and gotten pushed aside. "She's frightened," Ibrahim explained. "But she's done with the deception." Sadiq sat back, letting out a measured breath. "So we proceed with caution." In her quarters, Aminatu stretched out on the bed still dressed, her headscarf neatly placed nearby. She murmured a plea, not seeking fairness, but the fortitude to keep going. If this marked the conclusion, she intended to meet it upright. She was unaware that the foundation of falsehoods was starting to fracture. That individuals shaped by scarcity's lessons in perseverance and tactics, honed through hardship, were now fitting every element into place. She didn't realize the tale spun around her was on the verge of crumbling from its own meticulous flaws. All she sensed was the urban chill deepening, and that the coming day once more required resilience. She doubted she still held. The third hearing dawned beneath a brooding overcast, the sort that weighed down on Nairobi and unsettled even the boldest souls. Aminatu Bako paused outside the courthouse, lingering before stepping in. The structure appeared unchanged, lofty, stone-gray, detached. Yet within her, a transformation had occurred. Dread lingered in her heart, but it no longer dictated her steps. Weariness had settled in instead, constant and unyielding. The chamber hummed with expectation. Everyone anticipated this as the wrap-up. Reporters packed the seats, onlookers edged closer. Devices were poised yet subtle. The saga had evolved by now, no mere unfolding drama, but a decision poised for delivery. Aminatu settled into her chair. Opposite, Patrick Githingi exchanged subtle nods and faint grins with associates. He seemed at ease, verging on disinterested. To him, the matter was all but resolved. Eniru Okori arranged her documents, her face serene. She'd handled countless similar trials, ones where results were molded well before doors swung open. The judge arrived. The assembly stood, then hushed. The session launched without delay. Eniru recapped the charges with sharp detachment. Her phrasing exact, her delivery measured. She depicted Aminatu as defiant, evasive, erratic. She highlighted the autographs, the non-compliance, the alleged conduct trail. When done, she resumed her seat assuredly. Aminatu was summoned for her final words. She rose, deliberately, steadying herself on the table's rim. The space observed her, less with interest now, more with veiled irritation. "I have no fresh statements," she uttered softly. "Just the reality I've shared before." "And what might that be?" the judge inquired. "That I peddled meals," Aminatu answered. "That I posed inquiries. That I couldn't grasp the forms thrust my way." "Is that everything?" the judge pressed. Aminatu paused. Then she raised her head. "I'm destitute," she declared, "but I'm no fabricator." The statement lingered, vulnerable amid the tension. A low buzz swept the area. One person snorted, another fidgeted restlessly. Patrick Athingi reclined, interlocking his fingers while Aniru shot him a quick look before averting her eyes. The judge inclined his head thoughtfully. "Appreciated." The session paused momentarily. Beyond the chamber, groups formed, murmuring softly. Aminatu stayed put, gaze fixed forward, palms on her lap. That's when it struck her, the vibe. She glanced up and locked eyes with a figure by the rear partition. He stood tall, stance composed, stare unwavering. The intent in his regard, cautious, probing, made her pulse quicken. His features were unfamiliar, yet the sensation rang true. Before she could pinpoint it, a second fellow drew near, whispering low. The initial one dipped his head in agreement. A third approached, face impassive. They kept their distance. They offered no words. They simply observed. The break concluded. All resumed positions. The judge coughed lightly. "Prior to final arguments," he announced, "a motion has come in for new evidence." Aniru's brow creased. "From where, Your Honor?" The judge peered at his notes. "An external source." Patrick's frame tensed just a bit. "An external source," Aniru echoed. "This breaks protocol." The judge acknowledged with a nod. "Indeed. Still, considering the content outlined, I've permitted a quick examination." An aide advanced, bearing a dossier, passing it over. As the judge flipped through, stillness enveloped the room. Patrick edged closer, his features hardening with intent. "This had better prove pertinent," Ankiru cautioned, her tone deliberate. The judge kept his gaze downward. "It seems to carry weight." Aminatu remained rigid in her seat, bewildered by the unfolding events. Time dragged on. At last, the judge lifted his head. "I'll admit this evidence on a tentative basis," he announced, "but its origins require confirmation before it sways any ruling." Kiru rose swiftly to his feet. "Your Honor, this establishes a risky benchmark, as does sentencing based on falsified records." The judge counted evenly. The mention of forged stirred a wave of murmurs across the courtroom. Patrick's face grew taut. "Session dismissed until tomorrow," the judge declared. "We'll resume once the checks are complete." A sharp intake of breath came from someone up front. The gavel fell. The hearing concluded not in resolution, but in ambiguity. In the hallway beyond, pandemonium broke loose. What on earth occurred? Who provided those papers? Is the prosecution crumbling? Patrick hurried out, surrounded by his assistants. The composure he'd shown earlier had vanished. He barked orders into his cell phone while striding away. Ankiru trailed behind, her pace steady yet strained. Aminatu lingered for an instant, reeling from the shock. She couldn't grasp what had altered the course, yet clearly it had. From the rear of the room, one of the figures drew near her with cautious steps. "Ma'am," he murmured softly, halting at a polite remove. Aminatu turned to him, her pulse racing. Yes. He paused, as though selecting his phrasing with precision. Hold on to your faith! The timbre struck her like an old echo. Not the phrasing itself, but its warmth. A jolt coursed through her, keen and abrupt. She examined him intently now, noting the set of his chin, the genuine worry in his gaze that held no trace of condescension. "Do I know you?" she inquired. He swallowed hard. "Not in ages." Before she could press further, a second man appeared at his side, resting a hand on his arm and giving a subtle shake of denial. "Not now," the newcomer whispered. The first man acquiesced with a nod. Before long, they withdrew. Aminatu observed their departure, her breathing ragged. Beyond the courthouse doors, the heavens unleashed at last. Torrents poured down relentlessly, sending the crowd fleeing every which way. Aminatu, sheltered beneath the overhang, the downpour's rhythm enveloping her. After weeks of strain, an odd sensation flickered within her. Not ease, not elation, but the spark of potential. On the opposite side of the road, the trio huddled under a tree's branches, water drenching their jackets. "That was narrow," Wayne remarked. "Far too narrow," Sadie added. Ibrahim glanced at his device. "The checks will drag on. We must prepare for resistance. They'll attempt to suppress it, which confirms we're heading correctly," Wam noted. Sadi inclined his head in agreement. Ibrahim turned toward the building, his stare lingering on the entrance where Aminatu had vanished. "She hasn't pieced together our identities. She shouldn't yet," Sadi stated. "Only when it's secure," Wayne breathed out gradually. "We can't just spring a theatrical unveiling on her." "Indeed," Sadi concurred. "We owe her true accountability." As the storm eased into a light mist, Aminatu set off toward her makeshift lodging. Her attire clung wetly, her limbs throbbed with fatigue. The path ahead remained hazy, yet a change had taken hold. The inevitability of loss had fractured. She had no clue who had intervened for her, nor the reason. What she recognized was that, for the initial moment amid this ordeal, the narrative had halted. In that interlude, she permitted herself a tentative notion. Perhaps she wasn't as isolated as she'd assumed. The ensuing wait for confirmation seemed to eclipse any hardship Aminatu Bako had weathered. Days extended into a fraught hush. No calls to appear, no judgment, no clarifications. Nairobi pressed on with its daily grind. Yet for her, moments lingered like molasses. Each night she retreated to her sparse quarters, neatly arranging her head wrap, and endured the limbo. Endurance had long been her companion, but this suspension carried whispers, shards of optimism she dared not embrace. In the meantime, elsewhere in the bustling metropolis, the submitters of the files operated with subdued haste. They convened in a plain workspace atop a shuttered printing outlet, its panes obscured and its placard weathered away. The spot blended seamlessly into obscurity on purpose. Within, documents cluttered every inch. Sadiq Musa positioned himself by the pane, limbs folded, vigilantly surveying the avenue underneath. Decades handling docs had instilled in him the habit of bracing for backlash ahead of schedule. "They'll undermine the provider's credibility," he predicted, "or intimidate them quiet." "They've already made the attempt," Wayne Mensah responded, sifting through a hefty dossier of official stamps. "The court assistant hasn't returned to her place since the session. She's bunked with family." Ibrahim Lawal occupied the desk, his computer aglow with ledgers of dealings and chronologies. His delivery stayed composed, nearly clinical. That's precisely why we've relocated the duplicates, spread across 3 sites, 3 legal zones. He glanced around. Sink 1 and the rest emerge. Sadi gave an approving dip of his head. Solid plan. For the first occasion since the 1995 incursion, the 3 survivors settled in shared stillness, free from the compulsion to scatter. The tranquility summoned recollections they typically restrained. I can still picture that evening when she portioned out the final mug. One of them murmured gently. It held scarcely a drop. Sadiq's face grew taut. She never wavered. Ibrahim paused his laptop briefly. She taught me to handle cash properly, he added. I had to understand food prices to avoid any squandering. Silence settled over them. This legal battle was never simply about aid. It centered on acknowledgement, on rejecting the world's attempt to distort the essence of one woman's existence. Their probe had started long ago, unfolding gradually and independently, while managing supply deals connected to urban renewal initiatives, evictions, and swift property shifts to shadowy firms that popped up and vanished in a flash. Sadiq had detected recurring motifs. Aliases shifted, yet the authorizing marks remained unaltered. Kwame had encountered those identical identifiers when examining building tenders spanning nations, with unproven outfits securing huge deals. Local protests dismissed using the exact same phrasing. Ibrahim had traced the funds, subtle diversions, nested ledgers, resources diverted via non-profit facades that failed to deliver to those in need. At the heart of everything loomed Patrick Githinji, not some theatrical foe, but a far subtler threat. An expert. He avoided blatant theft. He arranged the chaos. He allowed bureaucracy to inflict the harm while keeping his own hands spotless. Aminatu's situation had popped up in Ibrahim's database as a minor oddity, seemingly trivial. Yet it rang a bell. The site, the dates, the wording around her supposed defiance. Then the connection emerged. Kwame had gazed at his display for an extended beat before uttering a word. That was her. Sadiq recognized it right away. They hadn't reached out to her at that point. Experience had drilled wariness into them. Rather, they observed. They bided their time. They cross-checked. When Aminatu received her court notice, they were already aware that the papers with her supposed mark were fakes, lifted from a prior hawker permit she'd once sealed with her thumbprint, now twisted to justify property grabs. They understood, too, that jumping in prematurely would send Githinji into hiding and seal the machinery against them. Thus, they held back. As the authentication proceeded now, tensions escalated with Kiru Okori seeking postponements over technical issues. Patrick Githinji's firms issued declarations stressing openness. Untraceable hints emerged, casting doubt on outside-backed meddling. Sadiq anticipated pushback. It arrived after dark on the 3rd night. A dark sedan trailed him from the harbor. Headlights dimmed, motor hushed. He veered an extra pair of corners and verified the pursuit. He refused to flee. Instead, he pulled over by a bustling gas stop and lingered. The vehicle eased up, then continued on. The warning was unmistakable. The following dawn, an unidentified caller rang. "You're in over your head," the tone advised evenly. "This battle's not yours." Sadiq ended the line wordlessly. Ibrahim detected odd probes into his setups. A subtle grin crossed his lips as he rerouted connections. "They're rattled," he observed. That night, Sadiq inclined his head. "Excellent." Meanwhile, Aminatu navigated doubt daily. She revisited the bus terminal, pausing at the fringe of her former stand's spot. Barricades from building work obscured the scene. Heavy equipment rumbled afar. Sorrow washed over her, not merely for her lost trade, but for the void it left in people's routines. A cabbie spotted her and faltered. "Ma'am, my apologies." Aminatu acknowledged him. For what exactly? He averted his gaze, admitting he'd swallowed the official story. She offered a soft smile. It's simpler to accept lies than face facts. Later that evening, she prepared a modest stew and offered portions to a pair of sweepers nearby. They partook in hush, thankful yet wary, as though generosity now demanded approval. Upstairs in the printshop's quarters, a notice landed. Authentication finalized. The papers from the external filer were genuine. The marks pinned on Aminatu Bako, proven counterfeit. Multiple renewal licenses displayed flawed sanction trails tied to the identical web. The magistrate called for comprehensive proceedings. Sadiq breathed out deliberately. "We're at the moment," he affirmed. "Prepared," Ibrahim confirmed. "All records, paths, and consenting voices in place." "And Aminatu?" Kwame inquired. Sadiq hesitated. "We tell her ourselves." They weighed the schedule, the dangers. In the end, they concurred. Nothing official yet, but imminent. Come morning, Aminatu got word to reappear in session. She chose her attire with precision, her grip firmer now. Deep down, she'd embraced that the outcome, good or bad, would find her upright. Stepping into the chamber, she saw the trio once more, positioned nearer this time. As she went by, one locked eyes with hers and dipped his chin in a courteous, knowing nod. Her pulse quickened. She couldn't explain it, but instinct assured her. The magistrate arrived. Everyone stood. "Fresh proof has been validated," the judge declared. "Proceedings will commence on claims of falsified records and abuse of power." Unease stirred across the space. Patrick Githingi remained rigidly composed. Nkiru Okora's face grew taut, not from dread, but from sharp strategy. Aminatu settled into her chair, fingers clasped tightly, breathing measured. The complete reality still eluded her. Yet she sensed its arrival, weighty, irrefutable, and desperately awaited. As the fresh proceedings kicked off, the courtroom transformed. The atmosphere thickened, buzzing with focus that formalities couldn't possibly diffuse. What unfolded now wasn't a scripted ritual to rubber-stamp results. It was a dig into the past, and all those gathered knew some hidden truth was on the verge of exposure. Aminatu Bako remained silent at her bench, palms interlocked, gaze straight ahead. She'd come to avoid seeking comfort in expressions. Optimism, whenever it surfaced, tended to vanish all too soon. Even so, a subtle spark of it stirred within her, dim yet real, akin to sensation creeping back into chilled hands. The judge summoned order and spoke to the assembly. After review, he announced, this court will scrutinize proof involving falsified papers, false statements, and organized abuse of power tied to the redevelopment initiative. Patrick Githingi's defense adjusted their positions, while Nkiru Okora rose, steady but watchful. Your Honor, she started, we assert that any discrepancies stemmed from clerical oversights, lacking any deliberate malice. The judge gave a single nod. That remains to be seen. The initial witness stepped forward, a woman in her early 30s, clad plainly, her fingers quivering on the stand. Aminatu dimly recalled her. An administrative aide she'd consulted once, seeking clarity on the forms. The aide's tone wavered as she testified. I received orders to handle paperwork, she recounted. Certain files came pre-endorsed. When I raised concerns about the endorsements, I was directed to continue anyway. By whom? The judge pressed. She paused, then uttered the name. Patrick Githingi's moniker hit the space like shattering glass. Whispers swelled. The judge lifted his palm for quiet. Nkiru jumped up at once. Your Honor, this witness lacks evidence. She'll only offer assertions. The judge countered, but the aide revealed emails, in-house notes, and authorization logs. She detailed how seller files were duplicated and repurposed to validate approvals, how fingerprints got digitized, how individuals like Aminatu Bako were selected precisely because they seemed unlikely to resist. Aminatu shut her eyes. Selected. The term seared. Another testifier corroborated the scheme from a different viewpoint. Then one more. A clear design took form, systematic, streamlined, brutal in its straightforwardness. Ibrahim Lawal took the stand next to trace the money flows. He delivered his account with poise, methodically walking the court through complex transfers and front entities. He demonstrated how compensation funds for uprooted sellers vanished en route, how cash looped via non-profit facades before settling into personal holdings. And these holdings, Ibrahim noted, gesturing to a diagram, trace back to firms associated with Mr. Githingi. Nkiru lodged a protest. The judge dismissed it. Kwame Mensah came after, laying out purchasing documents and tender offers. He outlined how entities in the identical web routinely secured deals post-approvals, how haste was fabricated to excuse the rush. This wasn't progress, he stated flatly. It was plunder. Sadiq Musa spoke final, focusing less on figures and more on sequences. He described how enforcement actions synced with initiative deadlines, how opposition got branded as lawlessness. He revealed how intimidation served as leverage, how quietude was enforced through warnings. Patrick Githingi remained stiff, his prior nonchalance evaporated. His attorneys murmured feverishly. Aminatu absorbed it all, dazed. Gradually, her bewilderment gained form. Her shame gained backdrop. Her anxiety gained identity. She wasn't isolated. She never had been. When summoned to reply, Patrick Githingi rose deliberately. His words emerged even-keeled. "This paints an unfair picture," he claimed. "I assigned duties. If errors occurred, that doesn't absolve responsibility." The judge shot back. Nkiru interjected once more. "Your Honor, my client rejects any purposeful misconduct." The judge inclined closer. "Purpose can be deduced from repetition." The phrase lingered. A break was declared. In the corridor, journalists swarmed, their inquiries now pointed. Patrick's stride quickened, smile absent. Nkiru muttered rapidly into her cell. Aminatu stayed put within, reeling. One of the men drew near. "Ma'am," he murmured gently. She glanced up to find the trio clustered. Sadiq, Kwame, and Ibrahim. For an instant, years collapsed. Their features had altered. Lines deeper, builds more solid, robust. Yet an essential quality endured. Their posture, their gaze toward her, free of blame. "Auntie," she breathed. Sadiq's throat worked. "It's us." Her inhale hitched. Her palms shook. "Eat," she uttered instinctively, the plea slipping out unbidden. She grinned amid the moisture in her eyes. Ibrahim inclined his head, gaze glistening. They held back from hugging her. Not there. They waited with deference, letting the instant settle. "We're with you," Sadiq affirmed. "And we won't go." Aminatu placed a palm against her heart, struck by an intense surge of sorrow and thankfulness that made her head spin. Her voice cracked as she whispered, "I believed you were lost forever." "We nearly were," Kwame replied softly. "But we made it back." The bailiff signaled the court's resumption. The three men retreated slightly, offering her room to compose herself. Aminatu drew in a steadying breath and sank into her chair, pulse racing. The judge picked up where he left off. "Given the presented proof," he declared, "this court determines there is ample basis to advance with indictments against several individuals." Murmurs of shock rippled through the chamber. "Additionally," the judge went on, "all claims against Aminatu Bako are now on hold, awaiting thorough examination. Not fully exonerated, yet the burden eased just enough for her to draw air freely. Tears traced paths down Aminatu's face. She let them flow unchecked. Patrick Githingi's complexion drained of color, while Kiru Okorier lowered herself into her seat, her usual poise fracturing at last. For the first time, her gaze met Aminatu's, not as a file, but as a fellow human. The judge concluded the session, mandating detentions, financial probes, and seizures of holdings. As people filed out, Aminatu stayed put briefly, dazed. 3 decades earlier, she had nourished 3 nameless starving lads. Today, they flanked her as grown men versed in the world's harsh mechanics and bold enough to defy them. Beyond the doors, photographers' bulbs popped. Journalists clamored for statements. Yet Aminatu strode evenly, flanked by Sadiq and Ibrahim, her footing firm. After years, she no longer sensed her own insignificance. Justice had shifted from a vague notion to a purposeful advance in her direction. Nairobi never handled such victories with restraint. By dusk, word of the paused accusations and ongoing probes had circulated far past the tribunal, past front-page stories, past the measured phrasing of official reports. It flowed via bazaars, transit stops, workplaces, and homes, evolving the tale with each sharing. Aminatu Bako wasn't the supposed destitute fraud anymore. She was the one who rose against the powerful. They had fabricated her downfall, exploited her identity, but as Aminatu soon discovered, vindication didn't dissolve peril. That very evening, back in her provisional lodging, a discreet rap echoed at the entrance, subtle, measured, cautious. Aminatu stiffened. Sadiq, who had accompanied her despite her protests, glided noiselessly toward it. Peering through the slim opening, he let out a tense breath. "Nobody worth your time," he murmured. The tapping repeated. Sadiq cracked the door, wide enough to bar entry. A sharply attired stranger loomed outside, courteous and unknown. "I've got a note to pass along," the visitor stated evenly. "For Ms. Bako." Sadiq held his ground. "From who?" The man offered a thin smile. "From those who dislike loose ends." Ibrahim materialized at Sadiq's shoulder, their combined stature dominating the tight area. "You can relay it to us," Kwame added. The intruder's expression stayed steady. "Advise her to publicly retract her involvement. Without fanfare, compensation awaits." Aminatu advanced. "No," she declared. The syllable was quiet, yet it rang with resolve. The man regarded her, then truly assessed her, and doubt briefly shadowed his features. "You're unaware of what you're turning down," he warned. "I know starvation," Aminatu countered, "and terror. Neither belongs to you." He observed her a beat more, then dipped his head. "Consider this your alert." With that, he pivoted and departed. Sadiq secured the door with care. "We'll relocate you," he proposed. "I refuse to flee," Aminatu responded. "You won't be," Ibrahim assured her kindly. "Just recover." They organized it swiftly, a secure flat, unassuming and veiled, shielded by obscurity over muscle. Aminatu balked initially, uneasy at the prospect of concealment, but weariness prevailed. For the first stretch in ages, she slumbered undisturbed by every creak. On the opposing front, tensions escalated. Patrick Githingi refused a silent exit. His firms issued denials of any misconduct. Supporters decried political agendas and outside meddling. Unnamed claims emerged, casting doubt on the reliability of testimonies. Kiru Okorie, too, confronted an alien role. Deep into the night, she lingered solo in her workspace, eyes fixed on the documents she'd once defended with assurance. The facts now stood irrefutable, the trends impossible to dismiss. She recalled Aminatu, the quiet resilience in her stance. Kiru had forged her path through triumphs and endurance in arenas that prized emotional distance. Now that very isolation bore down on her. Come dawn, she sought a conference with the legal team. Subsequent submissions saw her step away from Patrick Githingi's defense, invoking moral dilemmas. A modest gesture, yet it echoed forcefully. Within the protected quarters, Aminatu grappled with idleness. Perched at the pane, she observed the avenue underneath, fingers clasped. The stillness seemed foreign, nearly improper. They delivered sustenance, real dishes, hearty and comforting. Aminatu partook graciously, though deliberately, still adjusting to plenty given freely, sans strings. No need to hoard it, Kwame urged mildly. She offered a faint grin. Long-standing routines lingered. Sadiq kept her company, mostly absorbing her words rather than offering many of his own. Ibrahim managed the practical details in silence, making sure communications went to the proper recipients and any dangers were recorded. During one afternoon, Aminatu posed the query she'd kept bottled up. "How did you track me down?" The three men traded looks. "We never gave up the search," Sadiq replied. "We just figured out better ways," Kwame chimed in. "Your name popped up in places it had no business being." Ibrahim gave a subtle grin, and whenever it did, trouble was brewing. Aminatu absorbed their words with a slow nod. "I was terrified to nourish kids again," she confessed, "scared it might strip away all I had." Sadiq's tone stayed even. "It didn't take everything from you, it handed us a gift." Meanwhile, events outside gained speed. Initial detentions happened discreetly, followed by open announcements. Offices got shut down. Properties were locked. Figures once beyond reach now emerged into the light. Sentiment among the public swung dramatically. Street sellers who'd steered clear of Aminatu began mentioning her with admiration. Bus operators recounted her acts of kindness. Folks recalled minor favors they'd dismissed before. In parallel, the spot where Aminatu's stand had stood, raised just weeks prior, turned into an emblem. An image spread across the internet. The barren patch she'd toiled over for decades, now cordoned for probing. Flowers appeared there from one person. Another pinned a message. "She nourished us." The spotlight made Aminatu uneasy. "I never sought recognition for it," she murmured. Sadiq inclined his head. "That's precisely why it counts." The tribunal set a date for the closing session. On that day, Aminatu entered flanked by Sadiq and Ibrahim, no longer shielded, but affirmed in her experiences. The room brimmed with attendees. The magistrate, after poring over the proofs, addressed them straightforwardly. He declared, "This court officially exonerates Aminatu Bako from every charge, A sigh she'd unconsciously held slipped out. Moreover, the judge went on, this court acknowledges Ms. Bacco as a target of organized deception and abuse of power. The statement settled with quiet resolve. Patrick Githingi was absent. Authorities had detained him that very morning. A hush enveloped the space, not one of suspense, but the profound quiet after honesty takes root. Aminatu rose deliberately. No grin crossed her face, no triumphant gestures. She merely lowered her gaze. Reporters pressed forward beyond the doors, yet this time, Aminatu addressed them steadily. "I'm nothing extraordinary," she stated. "Just a person who provided for the needy whenever possible." She hesitated. "If that's an offense," she added, "then plenty of us share the blame." The gathering stilled. That evening, in the flat, Aminatu gathered with the trio who'd once been young patrons at her counter. "I'm unsure about tomorrow," she admitted. Sadiq offered a soft smile. "We were clueless once too," Kwame noted, "but we discovered the path ahead echoes our unseen choices." Ibrahim agreed with a nod. "And it holds on to them." Aminatu regarded them deeply, really seeing. They weren't wonders, they were outcomes. For the first time in ages, she permitted herself the faith that her selfless offerings hadn't gone to waste. Justice hadn't burst in swift or spotless. It came weary, overdue, and fraught with risk. Yet it came. The concluding session didn't resemble a typical trial. It resembled an accounting that at last summoned the nerve to declare its name. As Aminatu Bacco stepped into the structure that morning, Nairobi stirred with anticipation. Media vehicles crowded the road. Market workers murmured the latest while exchanging change. Strangers, unfamiliar with her, before now uttered her name with care, wary of slighting it anew. The chamber overflowed, not with thrill-seekers, but with those grasping the stakes. Modest traders, transit staff, office aides, everyday signers of forms. They'd never grasped how many had been displaced, muted, vanished. They'd arrived to witness if the apparatus would confront its error toward one overlooked soul. Aminatu positioned herself amid Sadiq Musa and Kwame Mensah, Ibrahim Lawal, right at their backs. She donned her usual modest head wrap and serene demeanor, though her bearing had shifted. She no longer appeared poised for verdict. She seemed one who'd endured. The judge took the bench. Silence reigned. "Today," he commenced, "this court wraps a matter stretching well past a single life. We're confronting not just deceit, but a systemic pattern of exploitation." His delivery remained measured. No theatrics. He trusted the facts to carry weight. The state attorney recapped the evidence: falsified records, forced endorsements, phantom firms, unlawful property grabs, perversion of aid groups. Accused parties' names rang out. Multiple stood, Patrick Githingi included. He seemed diminished, not in stature, but in stature of character. The boldness that had once cloaked him like a shield, now frayed. He dodged Aminatu's eyes altogether. Invited to respond, he did. "This has been blown out of proportion," Patrick claimed. "I meant no damage." The judge lifted a hand to interrupt. These were steps in progress, he noted, but intent, he added evenly, isn't judged by explanations offered once the truth emerges. It's gauged by decisions taken in private, away from prying eyes. Patrick went quiet. Then unexpectedly, the judge addressed Aminatu directly. "Ms. Bacco," he stated, "this court understands that your pain can't be reversed, though it can be validated." He waited a beat. "Do you wish to address us?" Aminatu rose gradually. The entire chamber seemed to hold its breath, drawn in by anticipation. She carried no prepared remarks. She hadn't practiced. She simply expressed herself as she always did. "I'm not schooled," she began. "I don't grasp complex structures. All I know is deprivation." She scanned the faces around her. "I nourished kids out of necessity. They were starving. I hawked meals to sustain myself. I questioned things because the documents thrust at me made no sense." Her tone remained steady. "Once the authorities branded me a deceiver," she went on. "I wondered if compassion had been my error." She halted, her palms gently placed on the bench. "Yet then I noticed them." She glanced toward Sadiq and Ibrahim. "And I realized compassion endures. It moves forward." Silence enveloped the room. "Revenge isn't my goal," Aminatu concluded. "I seek honesty and safeguards for those unable to challenge systems they can't comprehend." She resumed her seat. No cheers erupted. They weren't required. The judge issued the verdict. Every accusation against Aminatu Bako was dropped for good. The proceedings officially named her a target of organized deception. Compensation was required for forfeited earnings, ruined belongings, and psychological damage. An official statement of regret was compelled. Properties tied to unlawful evictions were seized for eventual reallocation. Patrick Gethingi was taken into detention. As the guards neared, he lifted his eyes to meet Aminatu's just once. In that instant, a flicker of awareness crossed his face. Not regret, but the dawning that the woman he'd once overlooked as insignificant now stood at the center of his collapse. Beyond the building, Nairobi seemed to breathe out, with photographers snapping and journalists pressing in. Yet Aminatu moved at her own pace. She proceeded steadily, flanked by the men who'd once shared her meals. On the steps outside, she paused. A journalist shouted, "Ms. Bako, what does victory feel like?" Aminatu pivoted. "It wasn't victory," she replied softly. "It was restoration." Her statement rippled outward quicker than any news bulletin. That same day, the bags arrived. Unlike before, they weren't paraded for effect. They were unpacked discreetly in a secluded space. Within lay paperwork, repayment money, and official validations. Not opulence for show, but essentials for rebuilding. Sadiq observed Aminatu closely while the items were outlined. "This fulfills the court's directive," he explained, "and extends beyond it. We've established a fund in your honor." Aminatu steadied herself against the table's side. "I don't require extravagance. You do need assurance," Sadiq murmured. "Not excess," Ibrahim chimed in. "But options." Aminatu shut her eyes for a moment. For the first time in years, tomorrow didn't loom as danger. Over the ensuing days, an unforeseen shift occurred. Aminatu went back to the bus park, not to peddle wares, but merely to linger. Folks knew her now, not as an icon, but as herself. A few offered regrets. Others stayed mute, offering only sheepish acknowledgments. She crouched briefly, her fingers brushing the spot of her former stand. Then she straightened. The urban sprawl had stripped away plenty from her, yet her self-respect remained intact. That night, with twilight fading, Aminatu prepared a meal once more, this time with company. Sadiq sliced the produce. Kwame cleaned the utensils. Ibrahim kindled the fire. They shared the food unhurriedly, mindfully, without haste or worry, just sustenance, companionship, and the subtle awareness that this ordinary scene, unnoteworthy to most, marked the real pinnacle of all prior struggles. Society had attempted to obliterate an impoverished elder. In the end, it compelled itself to recall her. Following the decision, existence didn't overhaul instantly. No grand festivities ensued. No triumphant scores played. No instant harmony settled in. What followed was subtler and more demanding. The sort of resolution that challenges someone to rediscover living after years braced in constant vigilance. Aminatu Bako eased into her altered routine. The fund created for her didn't bring fortune, it brought stability. It covered a simple dwelling on Nairobi's outskirts, neat, well-lit, near enough to the bus park for the rumble of vehicles to drift through her panes at dawn. It funded medical care she'd delayed for decades. It substituted her demolished booth with a sanctioned, secure spot of modest scale. Yet for several weeks, Aminatu avoided resuming her trade in foodstuffs. She rose at first light from long habit, perched at the sill, and observed the metropolis stir. On certain days she prepared surplus and stored it, perplexed by plenty. On others she skipped meals altogether. She discovered that scars from ordeal don't vanish with vindication. Sadiq, Kwame, and Ibrahim alternated visits to her place, always giving her space without intruding or lingering too much. They honored her pace, much like she had once honored their need when they were starving. On one afternoon, Ibrahim arrived with a slim envelope and set it down softly on the table. "There's one more thing," he mentioned. "Only if you're ready to listen." Aminatu stared at the envelope for what seemed like ages before giving a slight nod. Within it lay faded documents, patchy and delicate from age, entries from hospital ledgers long past, transfer papers including a name that was hers, garbled in spelling yet clearly identifiable. Her baby, not located or brought back, but followed to a point. Ibrahim explained with caution. "Your boy was moved to a countryside medical center amid the flooding. The paperwork indicates another transfer afterward. Then the path ends abruptly." Aminatu shut her eyes tight. For years, she'd clung to the darkest assumptions, because hoping felt too risky. Now she posed the question. Sadiq replied in a gentle tone. "We can confirm he survived beyond his early days, that you didn't forsake him, that the separation wasn't due to any shortcoming on your part." Aminatu placed her palm against her heart as a long-held tension began to ease after all those years. "I don't have to track him down," she murmured, following a prolonged quiet. "I just needed to know I hadn't abandoned him." They acknowledged her words with nods. That revelation wove itself into her recovery. Not a full resolution, but sufficient honesty to allow her sorrow to settle. Time moved on. When Aminatu eventually went back to the bus park, she did so on her own terms, not as an emblem. She resumed operations at her stand, without fanfare. The cooking vessel was fresh, yet the meals remained unchanged. Beans, maize, straightforward and genuine. The initial buyer paused briefly, then grinned. "I've been craving this," he remarked. News traveled not via digital means or fanfare, but via recollection. Conductors reappeared, sweepers came by again, loaders showed up at dawn. A few added tips, others stuck to the usual. Aminatu dealt with everyone equally. One dusk, a young boy lingered close by. Aminatu spotted him right away. The familiar dread surged, the urge to shield herself by looking elsewhere. But she pushed past it with steady breaths. "Feeling peckish?" she inquired. The boy dipped his head. Aminatu scooped some into a container and passed it over. "Go on, eat," she urged. The phrase carried a new weight now, not out of desperation or resistance, but rooted in steadiness. Meanwhile, across Nairobi, repercussions kept unfolding. Patrick Githingi's trial broadened. Additional identities emerged. Further survivors came forward. What started with a single disadvantaged lady began dismantling a vast network of exploitation, and Kiru Aurier gave honest testimony, owning up to her role. She offered no justifications. She avoided theatrics. She opted for responsibility rather than self-preservation. For Aminatu, true fairness wasn't about seeing influential figures topple. It was about structures halting briefly to truly hear. Several months on, the municipal board introduced safeguards for sellers, required document clarifications, neutral interpreters, and support services for those in casual labor. It fell short of ideal. It wasn't comprehensive, yet it marked a beginning. On the judgment's one-year mark, Sadiq, Kwame, and Ibrahim joined Aminatu at her booth once the day wound down. They shared a meal, as had become their routine, free of haste. "You altered our paths," Kwame noted softly. Aminatu dismissed it with a shake. "You reshaped them yourselves," Sadiq grinned. "You showed us the reason behind it," Ibrahim chimed in. "And you guided us on handling influence after we gained it." Aminatu regarded them. Three individuals who, as scrawny lads in oversized outfits, were now reliable, reflective, and mindful of their presence. "You didn't return with cash," she observed. "You returned with recollection." They lingered wordlessly, the urban buzz enveloping them. That evening, once they'd left, Aminatu tidied her spot and secured it. She made her way home at an easy gait. In her flat, she neatly tucked away her head wrap next to the mattress. She reclined without dread of approaching steps or raps at the door. She dozed off, not from weariness, but as one who no longer needed to defend her blamelessness, just to endure. Aminatu Bako never gained notoriety. She didn't amass riches. She attained something scarcer: security. And in the steady flow of her routine, with each portion dished out, each query posed, each kid nourished freely, the world absorbed a lesson it had fiercely resisted. That modest deeds performed unseen don't fade away. They persist, they expand, and in due course, they resurface, not as wonders, but as outcomes. Aminatu Bako's tale isn't centered on fortune, fate, or an abrupt boon that honors virtue. It's rooted in something tougher and truer: the prolonged, subdued persistence of compassion, amid a realm that frequently penalizes it prior to recognition. For ages, Aminatu nourished famished youngsters, not expecting it to transform her existence, but grasping how deprivation scars the spirit. She offered sans observers, sans deals, sans anticipation. And over decades, such generosity appeared to exact a steep toll: her security, her self-respect, even her identity. Society imparted the harsh truth that many upright souls grasp: acting rightly offers no shield from injury. Still, this narrative uncovers that benevolence doesn't evaporate merely from neglect. Kindness endures across the years. It embeds itself in hearts and minds. It influences their resilience, their perspectives, and their approach to authority once it's in their grasp. Aminatu didn't produce heroes. She nurtured individuals who stayed connected to their roots and rejected the very machinery that had once ground them down from harming the one who sustained them. In this tale, justice doesn't crash in with fanfare or haste. It creeps in, weary, postponed, and fraught with peril. It requires endurance, bravery, and the resolve to uphold honesty amid doubt about the results. Aminatu's triumph isn't riches or acclaim. It's security, it's reclaimed honor, it's the serene entitlement to exist free from dread. And maybe the most profound insight here is that you might never witness the complete ripple of your compassion. You might assume it went for naught. But out there, another soul is bearing the gift you offered. And someday, when life insists you were naive, frail, or mistaken, that same compassion could circle back, not to dazzle you, but to shield you.